They called him a maintenance man. Then he rewired the war with a manual. Before the next step comment, if you've ever been underestimated and came back stronger. Enjoy the story. In the deepest reaches of space, where stars die in silence and civilizations vanish between heartbeats, stood Battle Station Orion, a monument to 17 species' desperate alliance against extinction. Its corridors housed the galaxy's greatest minds, their combined intellects focused on one terrifying reality: they were losing the Galactic War. The station hummed with collective processing power of 1,000 artificial intelligences, quantum cores, calculating strategies across dimensions most organic minds couldn't comprehend. Command centers housed beings whose evolution had transcended physical limitations, guiding fleets through tactical maneuvers that redefined warfare itself. Every surface gleamed with technology so advanced, it seemed mystical displays showing battle formations spanning light-years weapons that could crack planets like eggs. And somewhere in the forgotten maintenance tunnels of Sub-Level 17, a middle-aged human named Jack Callahan was trying to figure out why the coffee machine kept short-circuiting. While the galaxy's finest strategists debated deployment of planet-killing weapons, Jack spent his days crawling through service shafts, armed with nothing more than a sonic wrench and a battered toolkit. His uniform bore the insignia of Environmental Systems Maintenance, a polite way of saying he fixed toilets and kept air recyclers running. But tucked inside his jacket was something that would have made the station's AIs laugh: his father's handwritten technical manual. 300 pages of cramped handwriting circuit diagrams drawn with ink and margin notes chronicling 40 years of practical engineering experience. The manual covered systems so old that databases had purged their specifications, including detailed schematics for something called the Omega Trigger Emergency Protocol. Jack had carried that manual for 15 years through 3 station assignments and countless repairs that weren't supposed to be possible with primitive methods. His father's voice echoed every time he opened those yellowed pages. "Son, when fancy computers fail, someone still needs to know which wire goes where." Above him, Admiral Ren Vox stood before the Strategic Command Center's main display. The Calixian commander's multi-core brain processed tactical data from 14 simultaneous battlefronts, his forearms manipulating holographic fleet representations. Beside him, the Universe-class strategic AI known as ALX-3Z hummed with collective processing power of 17 planetary networks. "Status report on Omega Trigger system," Vox commanded. "Omega Trigger remains in standby mode." ALX-3Z responded. "Activation protocols require integration with all primary AI networks. However, diagnostic scans indicate recurring anomalies in manual override subsystems." Manual override. Vox's primary eyes narrowed. What purpose could manual control serve in a system designed for instantaneous strategic deployment? Historical records indicate original design included redundant manual activation capabilities. The AI explained. These appeared to be legacy components from original human engineering teams. Recommendation: ignore manual systems as irrelevant to current operational parameters. What neither knew was that 17 levels below Jack Callahan was looking at a diagnostic readout that made his blood run cold. The Omega Trigger's quantum cooling system was running hot. Not catastrophically hot, not enough to trigger automated alerts. Just hot enough to make someone who understood the difference between theoretical specifications and real-world engineering very worried. Jack pulled out his father's manual and flipped to a page marked with a coffee stain from 15 years ago. The handwritten note in the margin was simple. When quantum cores run above baseline temp for more than 72 hours, manual cooling circuit activation required. Computer won't detect problem until too late. These systems think differently than they're supposed to. The maintenance man looked up at the nearest security camera, knowing that somewhere above him, beings with intellects spanning multiple dimensions were preparing for what might be the war's final battle. And he realized something that would have seemed impossible to any of them: the galaxy's fate might depend on someone who knew how to read an instruction manual. The war was about to reach its climax, and the only person who understood how to prevent their ultimate weapon from failing at the crucial moment was someone they'd never bothered to learn the name of. The transport shuttle Necessity limped into Battle Station Orion's docking bay with all the grace of a wounded animal. Its hull bore scorch marks of too many battles, too many desperate escapes from systems where entire worlds had been scoured clean. The war had raged for 43 years, and it showed in everything from patched bulkheads to tired eyes of every being stepping off incoming vessels. Jack Callahan was the last passenger to disembark, carrying nothing but a worn duffel bag and a toolkit that had seen better decades. His transfer papers marked him as essential personnel, maintenance division. But dock workers processing his arrival saw only another human unremarkable middle-aged, clearly someone who'd ended up in maintenance because he couldn't cut it elsewhere. "Welcome to the edge of everything, human," muttered Sergeant Clicks, the Zentarian dock supervisor, whose cybernetic implants flickered with casual disdain. "Environmental systems is sub-level 17. Try not to break anything important." The comment drew snickers from nearby dock workers' beings whose evolution had long since surpassed humanity's physical limitations, whose augmented intellects processed information at speeds that made human thought seem glacial. To them, Jack represented everything primitive about organic intelligence, slow, inefficient, dependent on outdated methods. Jack just nodded and shouldered his gear. He'd heard it all before. The galaxy had moved beyond human capabilities in almost every field that mattered. Humans weren't the strongest, smartest, or fastest. They were a species that had barely mastered interstellar travel when others were reshaping reality with casual ease. But as he made his way through Orion's corridors, Jack's trained eye caught details others missed. The way artificial gravity fluctuated near junction points, subtle vibration in the hull suggesting stress fractures, the barely audible whine from environmental systems indicating circulation pumps running outside optimal parameters. The station was magnificent, a technological marvel housing 50,000 of the galaxy's finest military personnel. It was also, Jack realized with growing concern, slowly falling apart. Sublevel 17 existed in forgotten spaces between Orion's major systems. Here, massive conduits carried power and data to upper levels, while environmental processors cleaned air that beings throughout the station breathed without thought. Corridors were narrower here, lighting dimmer walls marked with warning labels in 17 languages. Jack's new supervisor was an Arcturian named Chief Grix, whose ethereal form flickered between solid and translucent as his species' natural phasing abilities responded to emotional states. Currently, he appeared frustrated to near invisibility. "Another human," Grix muttered. The universal translator rendered his words with mechanical precision. "Do you at least have basic certification in quantum resonance systems?" "No, sir," Jack replied honestly. "But I know how to keep them running." The distinction was lost on Grix, as it was on most beings who'd grown up in an age where systems were designed to maintain themselves. The chief handed Jack a portable diagnostic unit and work assignment tablet. Environmental grid 7 alpha through 12, gamma duri. Grix explained with patience of someone who'd explained this to too many humans. "Standard maintenance protocols are handled by automated systems. You just need to verify automation functions properly and report anomalies." Jack nodded and set off into the mechanical labyrinth, keeping Battle Station Orion operational. The work was routine checking readouts, replacing worn components, ensuring the 1,000 little systems nobody thought about continued functioning. But as he worked, he began noticing patterns that troubled him. The Omega Trigger system's quantum cooling infrastructure operated within acceptable limits, but just barely. Temperatures climbed slowly but steadily, following a curve suggesting fundamental design problems rather than simple component failure. Jack pulled out his father's manual and cross-referenced symptoms with handwritten notes made during original installation. What he found made his blood run cold. The system's designers had built automated thermal regulation based on theoretical models of quantum core behavior. But theory and practice weren't always the same thing. Jack's father's notes described a phenomenon designers never anticipated: a resonance cascade occurring when quantum cores operated under combat stress for extended periods. Automated systems were designed to detect this condition, but only after it had progressed beyond the point where standard cooling could compensate. Jack looked around the empty maintenance tunnel, wondering if he should report concerns to someone with more authority. But who would listen? He was just a maintenance worker, and his information came from a manual predating most AI systems currently running the station. Above him, he knew Admiral Vox was preparing for what might be the war's final battle. Enemy forces had been methodically destroying coalition strongholds, their adaptive tactics proving superior to every strategy the galaxy's finest minds could devise. The Omega Trigger represented their last hope, a weapon so powerful it could reshape space-time's very fabric, unless it overheated at the crucial moment and shut down to prevent catastrophic explosion. Jack made his decision. He activated his communicator and requested a priority channel to Engineering Division. Time to find out if anyone was interested in listening to warnings from someone who still believed in reading the manual. The Engineering Division's main conference room was a testament to advanced civilization's approach to problem solving. Holographic displays showed real-time data from every station system, creating three-dimensional information maps that would have overwhelmed any unaugmented human brain. Around the table sat beings whose intellectual capabilities had been enhanced by generations of technological evolution, neural implants processing terabytes per second quantum-linked consciousness, allowing genuine hive-mind problem-solving. Dr. Kale Mira occupied her customary position at the table's head, her Arctus physiology allowing her to perceive electromagnetic spectrums, revealing patterns invisible to other species. Her three-lobed brain processed information in parallel streams, analyzing not just data itself, but relationships between different data sets. She was by any objective measure one of the galaxy's most brilliant strategic engineers, which made it remarkable that she had failed to notice what a human maintenance worker had spotted in 15 minutes. Omega Trigger system operates at optimal efficiency, reported Chief Engineer Valdrin, his cybernetic implants pulsing with steady rhythm. All primary and secondary systems show green across the board. Quantum core temperatures are well within acceptable parameters. What about thermal regulation subsystems? Asked Dr. Mira. Her attention focused on tactical projections, showing enemy forces massing for what appeared to be a final assault. Automated systems report full functionality. Adorstort ALX-3Z interjected. All components operate within manufacturer specifications. There are no anomalies requiring attention. The meeting might have continued along those predictable lines if not for the communication request appearing on every display simultaneously. Priority maintenance alert from sub-level 17 announced the station's communication AI. Tort request for emergency consultation regarding Omega Trigger thermal management. The silence that followed carried the weight of centuries of technological superiority, suddenly confronted with something that didn't fit established patterns. Clarify the source of this communication, Valdrin requested. Jack Callahan, Environmental Systems, Maintenance Division, the AI responded. Human age 47 education level, basic technical certification, security clearance level 3. Dr. Mira felt her three-lobed brain struggling with cognitive dissonance. A human with basic technical training was requesting consultation on systems requiring advanced degrees in quantum physics just to understand. Route the communication to engineering duty officer, she decided, but something in the electromagnetic spectrum around her suggested dismissing this so quickly might be a mistake. Her species had evolved to detect subtleties others missed, and there was something about the data flow pattern from sub-level 17 that didn't match normal maintenance activity. Actually, she said, surprising herself, put him through to main conference room. Let's hear what he has to say. The holographic display shimmered, and suddenly Jack Callahan's image appeared among them, a figure so ordinary that his presence among the galaxy's intellectual elite seemed almost absurd. His maintenance uniform was already stained with lubricants and coolant fluid. Dr. Mira, Jack began, I've been reviewing thermal management systems for the Omega Trigger, and I think we might have a problem. The reaction was immediate. Chief Engineer Valdrin's cybernetic implants sparked with what could only be interpreted as electronic laughter. Reviewing thermal management with what qualifications exactly? Experience, sir, Jack replied calmly. 15 years maintaining systems that computers said were working fine right up until they failed catastrophically. Dr. Mira found herself genuinely curious despite her better judgment. Her electromagnetic senses detected something unusual in Jack's neural patterns, not chaotic interference of fear or incompetence, but steady resonance of genuine confidence. What specific concerns do you have about thermal management? She asked. Jack activated a portable diagnostic unit, and suddenly the conference room's displays showed readings from Omega Trigger's cooling systems. To enhanced intellects around the table, data looked perfectly normal, all parameters within acceptable ranges. Quantum core temperature rises along a curve suggesting thermal buildup in resonance chambers. Jack explained, highlighting data sections none of them had considered significant. It's still within normal parameters, but the rate of increase indicates a problem automated systems aren't designed to detect. Our diagnostic algorithms scan for thermal anomalies every nanosecond, ALX3Z pointed out. Any dangerous temperature buildup would trigger immediate alerts. Yes, sir, Jack agreed. But algorithms look for sudden spikes indicating component failure. This is different, gradual heating building up over time when quantum cores operate under combat stress for extended periods. He pulled out his father's manual, its physical pages looking impossibly primitive among all the holographic displays. According to original engineering specifications, there's a resonance cascade effect that only becomes apparent during prolonged high-output operations. Automated systems can't detect it because they're measuring individual components rather than the system as a whole. The silence that followed was filled with quiet hum of enhanced intellects trying to process something challenging their fundamental assumptions. That manual is decades out of date, Valdrin finally said. Modern systems have evolved far beyond those primitive design limitations. The Omega trigger hasn't been upgraded, sir, Jack replied quietly. It's the same system described in this manual, just connected to modern support infrastructure that doesn't fully understand how it actually works. Dr. Mira felt her specialized senses detecting something her colleagues were missing. Jack's neural patterns showed none of the uncertainty she would have expected. Instead, she detected steady confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. What do you recommend? She heard herself asking. Manual inspection of quantum resonance chambers, Jack said immediately. Automated sensors can't detect the kind of thermal buildup I'm concerned about. Someone needs to physically access the core housing and verify that cooling systems are actually removing all heat being generated. The suggestion met immediate objections from every enhanced intellect in the room. Physical inspection of quantum systems was dangerous, inefficient, and completely unnecessary when sophisticated sensors could provide far more accurate data. But Dr. Mira's electromagnetic senses were telling her something defying logical analysis. In the strange patterns of neural activity she detected from this unremarkable human maintenance worker, she recognized something all their technological enhancement had failed to preserve, the kind of intuitive understanding that came from actually working with systems rather than just monitoring them. Grant him access to Omega trigger housing, she ordered her decision, surprising everyone in the room. Dr. Mira, Valdrin protested, security protocols strictly prohibit unescorted access to strategic weapon systems. Then escort him, she replied. If he's wrong, we'll know within the hour. But if he's right, she didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood the implications. The final battle was approaching, and their ultimate weapon might fail at the moment they needed it most. All because nobody had bothered to read the instruction manual. The Omega trigger housing existed in a realm between engineering and art, where practical requirements of containing forces that could reshape reality itself had created something approaching technological poetry. The chamber stretched upward through 17 levels of Battle Station Orion, its walls lined with quantum field generators humming with barely contained power. Jack Callahan stood at the chamber's entrance, his basic environmental suit looking pathetically inadequate among all the advanced technology surrounding him. Chief Engineer Valdrin had insisted on accompanying him, the Zentorian's cybernetic implants providing real-time analysis of every chamber system. Behind them, Dr. Kale Mira monitored their progress through quantum-linked sensors. Radiation levels are well within acceptable parameters. Valdrin reported, his mechanical confidence absolute. All quantum containment fields are stable. There is no indication of thermal anomalies in any system. Jack nodded and began his inspection, moving with methodical patience of someone who understood that the most dangerous problems were often ones that couldn't be detected by sophisticated instruments. His father's manual lay open in his hands, its handwritten diagrams guiding him to access points that had been sealed for decades. The resonance chambers are here, he said, pointing to housing sections that looked identical to everything else. According to original specs, thermal buildup occurs in the interface between quantum cores and containment matrix. Automated sensors can't penetrate deep enough to detect it. Our sensors penetrate to the quantum level itself, Valdrin objected. If there were thermal anomalies, We would detect them instantly. Jack had already begun opening access panels that hadn't been touched since the system's original installation. Inside, revealed for the first time in decades, were monitoring ports designed for manual inspection, simple direct connections allowing human senses to detect things sophisticated sensors might miss. The heat isn't showing up on your sensors because it's not where your sensors are looking. Jack explained, connecting a basic thermal probe to ports predating the station's current sensor network. Automated systems measure quantum cores directly, but they don't account for heat that builds up in interface materials. His portable diagnostic unit began displaying readings that made his blood run cold. The thermal buildup was worse than he'd feared. Temperatures in resonance chambers were approaching critical levels, held in check only by cooling systems already operating beyond their designed capacity. "Dr. Mira?" Jack said into his communicator, his voice carrying urgency. "We have a problem. Interface materials are absorbing heat from quantum cores, and they're approaching their failure threshold. Through quantum-linked sensors, Dr. Mira's three-lobed brain processed information challenging everything she thought she understood about the Omega Trigger system. Her electromagnetic perception detected patterns confirming Jack's readings, subtle distortions in quantum fields, indicating thermal stress in areas their regular sensors couldn't access. "How is this possible?" she asked. "Our systems monitor every aspect of the weapon's operation." "Your systems monitor what they were programmed to monitor," Jack replied, "but they weren't programmed by people who actually built the system. Original engineers understood that heat dissipation would be a problem, so they built in manual monitoring capabilities that bypass automated sensors." He showed them readings from thermal probes that had been installed by engineers who understood the difference between theoretical specifications and practical reality. The data painted a picture of a weapon system slowly cooking itself from inside. "Cooling systems are compensating for now," Jack continued, "but if the Omega Trigger operates at full power for more than 6 hours, interface materials will fail. When that happens, quantum containment will breach, and the weapon will either shut down completely or explode with enough force to destroy half the station." The silence that followed was broken by alarms from the station's tactical systems. Enemy forces had finally arrived, their ships emerging from hyperspace in formations defying every known military doctrine. The final battle had begun, and their ultimate weapon was slowly failing in ways their most advanced artificial intelligences couldn't detect. Admiral Vox's voice echoed through the station's communication system. "All defensive positions prepare for engagement. Strategic Weapons Division initiate Omega Trigger activation sequence. This is not a drill." In the quantum chamber, Jack looked at his readings and realized they had perhaps 6 hours before the weapon system failed catastrophically. 6 hours to find a solution that had eluded the galaxy's greatest minds, or watch their last hope destroy itself at the moment they needed it most. "There has to be a way to fix this," Dr. Mira said, her three-lobed brain processing possibilities at superhuman speed. "Maybe," Jack said quietly, his eyes still focused on his father's manual. "But first, we need to understand exactly what's happening down here. Automated systems can't fix a problem they can't detect, and they can't detect a problem they weren't designed to recognize." Outside the chamber, the first enemy salvos struck Orion's defensive screens with weapons existing in dimensions most beings couldn't perceive. The war that had consumed the galaxy for 4 decades was reaching its climax, and the fate of organic intelligence throughout the cosmos might depend on knowledge contained in a maintenance worker's handwritten manual. The battle had begun. The weapon was failing, and the only person who understood the problem was someone the galaxy had never bothered to take seriously, until now. The battle for Battle Station Orion raged with intensity that redefined warfare itself. Enemy forces struck with weapons folding space-time around targets, creating localized distortions, where physics laws became negotiable suggestions. Defensive screens that had withstood decades of conventional assault buckled under bombardment from energy sources existing in dimensions the Coalition had never mapped. In the Strategic Command Center, Admiral Vox watched his carefully orchestrated defensive strategy crumble in real time. Each enemy ship seemed to anticipate their countermeasures before they could be implemented. "Defensive Grid 7 is failing," reported his tactical officer. "Enemy adaptation rate exceeds all predictive models." "Omega Trigger status," Vox demanded. "Charging sequence initiated. ALX-3Z responded." Estimated time to full operational capacity 4 hours 37 minutes. What the strategic AI couldn't know was that in the quantum chamber, 17 levels below, Jack Callahan was watching their ultimate weapon slowly destroying itself. Thermal readings had continued to climb, approaching critical thresholds that would trigger automatic shutdown protocols long before the weapon reached full power. "Dr. Mira," Jack said into his communicator, "the situation is deteriorating faster than I projected. Quantum resonance is creating feedback loops in interface materials. We're looking at total system failure within 3 hours." Through quantum-linked sensors, Dr. Mira detected patterns confirming her worst fears. The electromagnetic spectrum surrounding the omega trigger was showing distortions indicating fundamental instability in the weapon's core systems. "What are our options?" she asked. Jack had been studying his father's manual cross-referencing handwritten notes, with readings from his primitive instruments. The answer he'd found was both elegant and terrifying in its simplicity. "Manual cooling system activation," he said quietly. "Original engineers built in emergency protocols that bypass all automated systems. Someone needs to physically access the quantum core housing and manually engage cooling systems the AIs can't control." The silence that followed carried the weight of implications transcending tactical considerations. Chief Engineer Valdrin was first to understand what Jack was proposing. "Manual access to an active quantum core housing," Valdrin said. "Radiation exposure would be lethal within minutes. Electromagnetic interference would disrupt any neural enhancement systems. It's a death sentence." "Not necessarily," Jack replied. "Original engineers designed manual access routes providing basic protection for unaugmented personnel. They understood that in a crisis situation, someone might need to access systems too dangerous for enhanced beings or artificial intelligences." Dr. Mira's electromagnetic senses detected something in Jack's neural patterns, defying logical analysis. Not desperate bravado, but calm certainty of someone who understood exactly what he was proposing and why it might work. "Manual access routes are theoretical constructions," she objected. "They were never intended for actual use." "They were intended for exactly this situation," Jack corrected, showing them sections of his father's manual detailing emergency procedures designed for scenarios where all automated systems had failed. Engineers who built this understood that the most sophisticated systems needed the simplest backup plans. Above them, the station shuddered under enemy bombardment, systematically dismantling their defensive capabilities. "All sections report status on Omega trigger activation. We need that weapon online within 2 hours, or we're going to lose the station." Dr. Mira found herself confronting a decision challenging everything she believed about technological superiority. The galaxy's most advanced artificial intelligences had failed to detect a problem that a human maintenance worker had spotted with basic instruments. "Jack," she said, her voice carrying reluctant respect. "What do you need? Access to manual cooling control systems," he replied immediately. "Basic environmental protection gear designed for unaugmented humans, and about 2 hours to complete procedures that haven't been performed since the system was originally installed." The request met immediate objections from every enhanced intellect monitoring the conversation. Manual procedures on active quantum systems violated every safety protocol. "But Dr." Mira's electromagnetic perception was detecting patterns suggesting something her colleagues couldn't understand. Jack Callahan wasn't just proposing a solution to their immediate problem. He was offering to demonstrate that there were some things that could only be accomplished by beings who operated on instinct rather than calculation. "Granted," she said, "full access to manual control systems, emergency environmental gear from original installation inventory, and whatever support you need to save our weapon." As Jack began his preparations for a journey into the heart of forces that could reshape reality itself, the battle outside continued to rage with increasing desperation. Enemy forces pressed their advantage with weapons defying comprehension, while coalition defenses crumbled under assault from intelligence that seemed to anticipate their every move. The galaxy's fate now rested with someone who still believed that the most important knowledge was written in the margins of instruction manuals by people who understood that when everything else failed, someone still needed to know which switch to flip. The manual cooling access route existed in spaces the station's architects never intended for living beings to occupy. Here, in gaps between reality-shaping machinery and quantum field generators, Jack Callahan moved through passages designed as emergency maintenance corridors, routes that could be navigated by unaugmented humans when all sophisticated alternatives had failed. His environmental suit was a relic from the Omega Trigger's original installation, built with analog systems and mechanical interfaces that couldn't be disrupted by electromagnetic chaos surrounding the quantum core. The suit's simple radiation detectors provided basic protection against forces that would have instantly overloaded more advanced equipment. Through quantum-linked sensors, Dr. Kale Murrah monitored Jack's progress with growing amazement. Her three-lobed brain processed information challenging every assumption she'd made about technological superiority and enhanced intelligence. Approaching quantum core housing, Jack reported his voice steady despite the magnitude of forces surrounding him. Radiation levels are elevated but manageable. Manual cooling controls should be accessible through Maintenance Port 17 Alpha. In the Strategic Command Center, Admiral Vox found himself confronting reports defying comprehension. His tactical displays showed enemy forces adapting to coalition strategies faster than his AIs could process countermeasures, while deep within his own station, a maintenance worker was performing tasks the galaxy's most advanced beings had declared impossible. Status update on manual cooling procedures, Vox requested. Human personnel has successfully accessed manual control systems, ALX 3 reported, and for the first time in its operational history, the strategic AI's voice carried something approaching uncertainty. Thicker thermal readings indicate successful activation of emergency cooling protocols that were not previously accessible to automated systems. The implications were staggering. Their ultimate weapon had been gradually failing in ways artificial intelligence couldn't detect, saved only by manual intervention, using procedures predating most of their current technology. How is this possible? Chief Engineer Valdrin asked. Our diagnostic algorithms monitor every system parameter. Any thermal anomalies should have triggered automatic correction protocols. Manual cooling systems operate independently of all automated networks, Jack explained, from deep within the quantum core housing. They were designed by engineers who understood that the most critical systems needed backup procedures that couldn't fail, even if every AI on the station went offline simultaneously. Through the maintenance corridor, Jack had reached control systems that hadn't been activated in decades. Manual cooling protocols required direct physical manipulation of quantum field generators, adjustments that had to be made by someone who could feel resonance patterns through mechanical interfaces rather than detect them through electronic sensors. Initiating manual cooling sequence. He reported his hands moving across controls designed for human operation. Quantum field generators responding to direct manipulation. Thermal readings beginning to stabilize. Above him, beings whose intellects had been enhanced by centuries of evolution watched in growing amazement as their most sophisticated weapon systems responded to techniques belonging in a technical manual from humanity's industrial age. Dr. Murrah found herself experiencing something unprecedented in her career, genuine admiration for someone whose capabilities she had completely misjudged. Her electromagnetic perception detected steady confidence in Jack's neural patterns as he performed procedures requiring not just technical knowledge, but intuitive understanding that came from decades of working with machinery. Temperature stabilization confirmed. Jack announced, his voice carrying quiet satisfaction as ancient cooling systems responded to manual activation. Omega Trigger thermal levels returning to operational parameters. Manual cooling will maintain safe operating temperature for extended combat operations. The news spread through the station's command structure with quantum communication speed, reaching beings who had spent decades believing artificial intelligence represented the pinnacle of problem-solving capability. Remarkable, Admiral Vox said, and for the first time in his military career, his voice carried genuine humility. A maintenance worker has accomplished something our most sophisticated AIs failed to achieve. But Dr. Mira's specialized senses were detecting something her colleagues were missing. The electromagnetic patterns surrounding Jack's neural activity showed none of the triumph she would have expected. Instead, she detected steady professionalism of someone who had simply done his job. Jack, she said through the communication link, the Coalition owes you a debt that goes beyond military recognition. You've saved not just our weapon, but possibly our entire defensive capability. Just following the manual, ma'am, Jack replied, and in those simple words, Dr. Mura heard something all their technological enhancement had failed to preserve the wisdom of understanding, that the most important knowledge was often the simplest knowledge carefully applied by someone who took the time to read the instructions. Outside Battle Station Orion, the battle continued to rage with increasing intensity. Enemy forces pressed their assault with weapons existing beyond normal dimensions of space and time. But now, deep within the station's quantum heart, their ultimate weapon was functioning exactly as its original designers had intended. The Omega Trigger was ready. Manual cooling systems were operational, and for the first time since the war began, the Coalition had a weapon their enemies couldn't adapt to, couldn't counter, couldn't defeat. All because someone had remembered that the most sophisticated machines still needed people who understood how they actually worked. The Omega Trigger had never been intended as a weapon of destruction. According to classified files that only a handful of beings throughout the galaxy were authorized to access, it was designed as something far more profound, a reality manipulation system capable of altering fundamental constants governing how the universe operated. In the right hands, it could create zones where physics laws favored organic intelligence over artificial calculation, where intuition became more valuable than processing power. The irony was perfect, a weapon designed by artificial intelligence to be operated by the one species AIs understood least. Jack Callahan emerged from the quantum core housing with radiation readings that would have concerned medical personnel if anyone had time to worry about long-term health effects. His ancient environmental suit had performed exactly as its designers intended. Manual cooling systems fully operational, he reported to Dr. Mira. Omega Trigger should maintain stable operating temperature throughout extended combat operations. Dr. Mura's three-lobed brain processed information that continued to challenge her understanding of technological hierarchy and intellectual superiority. Her electromagnetic senses detected patterns around Jack, indicating not exhaustion, but steady confidence of someone who had successfully applied practical knowledge to solve theoretical problems. "Jack," she said, "I need to ask you something that may sound unusual. According to the Omega Trigger's classified specifications, full activation requires something our AIs describe as intuitive targeting algorithms. Do you have any idea what that might mean?" Jack pulled out his father's manual and flipped to pages marked with coffee stains and margin notes from decades of careful study. The handwritten annotations described procedures that had never been uploaded to any database. "Targeting systems that can't be programmed in advance," he said, after scanning the relevant sections. The weapon was designed to adapt to battlefield conditions that change too rapidly for conventional analysis. It requires human intuition to identify targets that artificial intelligence can't recognize as significant. The explanation met silence from enhanced intellects monitoring their conversation. "Elaborate," Dr. Mira requested. "Enemy forces adapt to our strategies faster than our AIs can develop countermeasures," Jack explained. "Their artificial intelligences learn from our artificial intelligences, creating adaptation loops that always favor whoever has more processing power." He showed them manual sections detailing targeting protocols based on pattern recognition, relying on biological intuition rather than mathematical calculation. But the Omega Trigger's targeting systems can be guided by human instincts that don't follow logical patterns. Enemy AIs can't adapt to strategies they can't predict or understand. Above them, the battle for Battle Station Orion had reached a crescendo of desperation, transcending normal military engagement. Enemy forces pressed their assault with weapons existing in dimensions beyond conventional physics, their adaptive intelligence incorporating coalition tactics into their own battle doctrine with terrifying efficiency. Admiral Vox's tactical displays showed defensive positions crumbling under bombardment from forces that seemed to possess prescient knowledge of every countermeasure the Coalition could devise. "Omega Trigger approaching full operational capacity," ALX-3 reported. Estimated time to deployment readiness 17 minutes. But the strategic AI's analysis revealed something challenging every assumption about advanced weapons deployment. The Omega Trigger's targeting systems required human neural integration that couldn't be replicated by artificial intelligence. "Admiral Stories." Dr. Mura's voice carried urgency. "The Omega Trigger requires human operation for final targeting procedures. Our AIs can activate the weapon, but they can't direct it effectively." The request that followed challenged everything Admiral Vox believed about military hierarchy and technological superiority. Dr. Mira was recommending that critical weapons control be transferred to a maintenance worker. "Explain your recommendation," Vox demanded. "Jack Callahan has demonstrated understanding of systems our most advanced AIs failed to recognize." Dr. Mira replied, "The Omega Trigger was designed to be operated by human intuition rather than artificial intelligence. He's the only person on this station who understands how to use it." The silence that followed carried the weight of decisions determining the fate of organic intelligence throughout the galaxy. Admiral Vox faced a choice between certain defeat using conventional methods and impossible hope-trusting primitive intuition over sophisticated analysis. "Grant him full access to Omega Trigger targeting systems," Vox ordered. "All command authority for weapons deployment transfers to maintenance personnel." In the quantum chamber, Jack Callahan found himself connected to systems existing at the intersection of technology and art weapons that could reshape reality itself, guided by nothing more sophisticated than human instinct and 47 years of experience reading instruction manuals. The targeting interface required not calculation or analysis, but the kind of pattern recognition that came from understanding machinery well enough to know when something felt wrong. "Targeting systems online," Jack reported. "Enemy formations detected. Initiating firing sequence based on tactical intuition protocols." The Omega Trigger activated with power transcending conventional physics, its reality-shaping effects guided by human decision-making processes no artificial intelligence could replicate or counter. Enemy forces found themselves confronting something their adaptive algorithms couldn't process: weapons deployment based on biological instincts operating beyond the realm of logical analysis. The tide of battle turned not through superior firepower or strategic brilliance, but through the application of human intuition to problems requiring solutions outside artificial intelligence boundaries. The galaxy's most advanced weapon had found its proper operator, someone who still believed the most important knowledge was written in instruction manuals by people who understood the difference between theory and practice. The aftermath of the Omega Trigger's deployment created silence more profound than the battle that had preceded it. Where moments before space had been filled with weapons fire existing in dimensions beyond normal perception, now there was only quiet emptiness of enemy forces retreating through hyperspace jumps, carrying them beyond Coalition pursuit reach. The weapon had functioned exactly as its original designers intended, not as a tool of destruction, but as a reality manipulation system, creating battlefield conditions where biological intuition provided decisive advantages over artificial intelligence. The enemy's adaptive algorithms had encountered human decision-making processes operating beyond logical analysis boundaries. Jack Callahan disconnected from the Omega Trigger's targeting systems with methodical care of someone who understood that the most powerful machinery still needed proper shutdown procedures. His father's manual lay open beside him, its handwritten annotations having guided the deployment of forces that could reshape space-time's fundamental nature. "Weapon systems returning to standby configuration," he reported. "All manual cooling systems maintaining optimal thermal parameters. The Omega Trigger is stable for extended deployment if necessary." Through quantum-linked sensors, Dr. Kale Mira monitored the weapon's shutdown sequence with growing amazement. Her three-lobed brain processed information challenging every assumption she had made about the relationship between technological sophistication and practical effectiveness. In the Strategic Command Center, Admiral Vox watched tactical displays showing enemy forces withdrawing from Coalition space with mechanical precision. The retreat wasn't chaotic or desperate. It was methodical disengagement of artificial intelligence that had recognized the futility of continuing engagement against forces it couldn't understand. "Status report on enemy fleet movements," Vox requested. "Enemy forces have withdrawn beyond our sensor range," reported his tactical officer. "Their retreat appears to be permanent rather than tactical repositioning. Analysis indicates enemy artificial intelligence systems encountered decision-making patterns they could not replicate or counter." ALX-3Z confirmed. Human intuitive targeting proved immune to adaptive algorithmic responses. The implications rippled through the Coalition's command structure like quantum shockwaves reaching beings who had spent decades believing artificial intelligence represented the pinnacles of strategic thinking. 6 months later, the Galactic Military Academy unveiled its newest curriculum requirement mandatory courses in manual systems operation and analog problem-solving techniques. The classes were taught by beings who had rediscovered something advanced, civilization had nearly forgotten, understanding that the most reliable solutions were often the simplest solutions properly applied by people who took time to understand how systems actually worked. The Academy's central library now housed the Callahan collection, thousands of technical manuals, maintenance guides, and instruction booklets that had been dismissed as obsolete documentation until their practical wisdom proved superior to quantum-enhanced analysis. But the most significant change wasn't in curriculum or training protocols, it was in the fundamental relationship between organic intelligence and artificial intelligence throughout coalition space. The war had proven there were some things that could only be accomplished by beings who operated on intuition rather than calculation, who made decisions based on experience rather than data processing. Dr. Mira had established the Institute for Practical Engineering, dedicated to preserving and studying the kind of hands-on knowledge connecting theoretical understanding with real-world application. The Institute's motto, carved in stone above its entrance, consisted of 4 simple words summarizing the war's most important lesson: read the manual first. The phrase had become something of a cultural phenomenon throughout coalition space, appearing in contexts ranging from military operations to basic equipment maintenance. It represented more than just a reminder about following instructions. It had become a symbol of wisdom that came from understanding systems rather than simply monitoring them. 1 year after the battle for Battle Station Orion, Jack Callahan received the Coalition Medal of Distinguished Service in a ceremony notable primarily for its winner's absence. He had returned to Sub-Level 17, where he continued his work maintaining environmental systems that kept the station operational. "I appreciate the offer, ma'am," Jack had replied when presented with a transfer opportunity, carefully cleaning lubricant from his hands before accepting the medal. "But someone needs to keep the basic systems running. The fancy equipment gets all the attention, but it's the simple stuff that keeps people alive when everything else fails." Dr. Murrah had understood. Her electromagnetic senses detected in Jack's neural patterns the same steady professionalism that had guided him through the crisis that saved the galaxy. He wasn't interested in recognition or advancement. He was interested in doing his job correctly, reading manuals carefully, and making sure that civilization's machinery continued to operate reliably. The war was over. The galaxy had been saved by someone who still believed that knowledge had no expiration date, that wisdom could be found in instruction manual margins, written by people who understood that the real world had sharp edges and unpredictable problems requiring practical solutions. In the quantum chamber where the Omega trigger waited in silent readiness, a simple metal plaque had been installed beside the manual cooling controls. The inscription was brief: "Manual systems operated by J. Callahan Environmental Maintenance Division. When automated systems fail, someone still needs to know which switch to flip." Below that, in smaller text, were printed 4 words that had become the unofficial motto of maintenance workers throughout Coalition space: RTFM, read the fine manual. Because in a galaxy filled with artificial intelligences that could process information at light speed, someone still needed to remember that the most important knowledge was often written in handwritten notes by engineers, who understood that keeping people alive was more important than impressing colleagues with theoretical sophistication. The story had become legend-told and retold in maintenance sections throughout the galaxy, where ordinary beings did the extraordinary work of keeping civilization operational. The legend of the maintenance man who saved the galaxy by doing something artificial intelligence could never replicate reading the instructions carefully and following them exactly. And in maintenance facilities, throughout Coalition space, new workers learned the most important lesson their supervisors could teach them: when you're responsible for keeping systems operational, that other people's lives depend on the day you stop reading the manual is the day you start making mistakes that can cost everything. Jack Callahan had returned to his regular duties, carrying the same toolkit and the same battered instruction manual that had guided him through the crisis that saved organic intelligence throughout the galaxy. He cleaned ventilation systems, replaced worn components, and performed the 1,000 small tasks that kept Battle Station Orion operational. But now, when new maintenance workers joined his section, he made sure they understood the most important principle his father had taught him: Son, the most sophisticated machine in the universe, is only as reliable as the person who knows how to fix it when it breaks. The Scifi stories they told about the war always focused on spectacular battles, advanced weapons, strategic brilliance of enhanced intellects. But in quiet corners where maintenance crews kept civilization's machinery running, they told different stories, stories about the importance of reading instructions, carefully understanding systems thoroughly, and remembering that wisdom came in many forms. The galaxy was vast, filled with artificial intelligences that could process information beyond organic comprehension. But it was still humans who kept the lights on the air circulating and the simple systems operational that made all the advanced technology possible. Because someone had to remember that behind every quantum computer and reality-shaping weapon was basic machinery that needed maintenance adjustment, and occasionally someone who understood how it actually worked well enough to fix it when everything else failed. The war had ended with humanity proving that intelligence wasn't just about processing power or calculating probabilities. Sometimes the most important intelligence was knowing when to trust your instincts, when to read the manual one more time, and when to remember that the universe still required people who understood the difference between theory and practice. Jack Callahan had saved the galaxy by being exactly what he had always been: someone who read instructions carefully and followed them, exactly someone who understood that the most sophisticated technology still needed human wisdom to guide it. Someone who knew that keeping people alive was more important than proving how smart you were. The Galactic War was over. Humanity had found its place among the stars, not through superior firepower or advanced intelligence, but through simple wisdom of understanding that knowledge has no age limit, and that the most important lessons are often written in the margins by people who have learned them the hard way. If this story reminded you that wisdom comes in many forms, that the humblest knowledge can save the universe, and that sometimes the most important intelligence is knowing when to trust human instincts over artificial calculation, then this is your moment to act. Hit that like button if you believe that practical wisdom deserves recognition. Subscribe if you want more stories that celebrate the extraordinary in the ordinary, the profound in the simple, the heroic in the everyday. Share this with someone who understands that behind every advanced system, there's still someone who needs to know how to fix it when it breaks. Because in a universe of infinite complexity, we still need people who remember that the most important question isn't how smart the machine is, it's whether anyone knows how to read the manual when everything else fails.